Hey, ni makoma kontektansi, ni atane atawa pamtikuk, all my relations. Je suis très fier d'être ici aujourd'hui. Thank you very much for those cheers I heard. I really appreciate it. So I actually am here to speak not about politics, but a little bit more about, we're going to battle, the battle of the voices. Who can be louder? I will fill up the sound with the Indigenous voices. Anyways, hopefully we won't have to battle too hard. So I come from Red Pheasant Cree Nation in Saskatchewan, which is a Cree community just outside of Battleford. We are part of the Battleford Tribal Council, and there are 6 First Nation communities that make up that Tribal Council. We signed Treaty 6. I'm here to speak a little bit about my experiences in the Canadian Armed Forces. I think it's quite a bit of feedback here. Let me just move it back. Is that better? I'll try and get behind the microphones or speakers. So, the history of Indigenous peoples in the Canadian Forces, as many of you know, Indigenous peoples have been warriors for a long time, and the warrior code for Indigenous peoples, whether you're Cree or Anishinaabe or Dene, is quite actually extensive. And you don't actually just fight just because you fight. There are certain protocols and rules about why you go to war and what you do and why you do it. So for instance, there are the 7 teachings, and imagine a soldier, why they, today, if they would say, I'm fighting for love. Would anyone really believe that? So Indigenous warriors traditionally would actually fight for love. You fight for the love of your family, for your community, fight for the love of your language, you fight for the love of the land that you're on. That's an extremely important concept. And I think that also goes with any of the teachings, whether it's humility, honesty, truth, respect, courage, knowledge. These Indigenous ideals governed how warriors and what they would do and how they would go about things. Now, after a treaty was signed in across Canada, and in Treaty 6, it was 1876. There was also something passed at the exact same time. It was the Indian Act in 1876. So we tried and signed a treaty of friendship, and at the same time, the Parliament of Canada passed a law which restricted the movements and confined Indigenous peoples to reserves. And over time, as the elders would say, some of the elders would be around the campfires and they'd be discussing the exploits that they had done as young children. And then the adults, or the a little bit younger generation, would be listening to that, thinking they had seen their parents go off to fight those battles, those great wars, and then the children could only imagine what it was like, because they had not even participated. But that warrior culture always remained in each and every one of us. That there is that blood memory. And so in the First World War, when the Queen or the Crown put out a request for soldiers, many Indigenous peoples joined up to fight. Even though they weren't Canadian citizens and were not considered Canadian citizens, they still were welcomed into the Canadian forces because they were seen as being part of this warrior culture, because they were understood as being very strong warriors. And so this, when they came home though, they were not respected. They weren't able to own land, they weren't able to vote, they weren't able to participate fully in Canadian society, even though they had fought for the society. And this went on even into the Second World War, where warriors would go off, such as Tommy Prince, who many of you have heard about, and who will soon be actually having a stamp to honor him today, unveiled in October. Tommy Prince was a warrior with the PPCLI, the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. And he went off to the Second World War, fought in Italy very bravely, fought throughout France, in the Netherlands, freeing the Dutch from oppression from the Nazis, and trying to help the world become a better place. Now, my own experience in the Army, well, I joined when I was very young, 27 years ago. I don't know if you can imagine how young I was, but it was quite a number of years ago, and it was a very interesting experience. In fact, actually, I joined the Royal 22nd Regiment, which is one of the infantry battalions and regiments based in Quebec City. And usually we have to present ourselves. I was a corporal, I was just finishing up my university, and I had been posted out there. in Quebec City, and I didn't speak any French. But they sent me out there anyways, and you have to present yourself to your commanding officer. And so there's a certain way that you're supposed to present yourself to your commanding officer in his office, and you come to attention and you salute. And I'll demonstrate it for you. It's quite a bit of fun. Corporal A19A2C 967, report for duty, sir! And you yell that out as loud as you can. Show your strength. You come to attention, and then he slams on his desk. Boom! And he says, there's 3 things that we don't like in this regiment. We don't like Anglophones. We don't like the English. We don't like women. And we don't like any goddamn Indians. So get this guy out of here. I don't want to see his face in this regiment ever again. And dismissed, Corporal. Yes, sir! And I was dismissed. And off they sent me to language school. And I think they expected me to stay at language school for, I don't know, maybe a couple years, and they would kind of forget about me and I would disappear. In 4 months, I worked very hard, I was bilingual, and I was back in front of that commanding officer. He couldn't get rid of me, because I wasn't going anywhere. And so that was perseverance, because I could tell you it was a really tough time in that regiment for many, many years. I stayed 6 years. And even though sometimes we would have a Christmas celebration and the commanding officer would go down the line shaking everyone's hand when they welcome you back after the New Year's, and he wouldn't want to shake my hand, I still would put up my hand willing to shake it no matter what. Now that carried on for, as I said, for a few years. But over time as a young man, I grew to understand that I had a role to play in trying to push change within the society that I was in. Not to accept that situation, not to accept my commanding officer's opinion or his broken way of thinking. So you have to push him. You have to push your people around you. And sometimes in a kind way. Obviously I can't yell at my CO because I'll end up charged and I'll end up in the brig or with the military police charged, and I'll be saluting more people and shining more boots on my own. But you have to do things in a good way. And so I certainly continued to do that. But eventually at one time I decided to grow my hair long. I didn't always have my hair long in a braid. And even though when I started growing my hair, it wasn't very well accepted. Now, warriors have always often had their hair long. And there's cultural reasons related to that, about knowledge, about who we are. It's about connection to our memory. And it's very important. It's connected to spirituality. Who can touch our hair? And I think many of you might know those teachings, or you can look them up online. I believe there's something called Men with Braids. You can look up some of those teachings, or you can speak to an elder about it. But I remember I was... after I just started growing my hair and it was starting to get long and in a braid, I had a person come up. And you're not going to believe who it was, because the Canadian Forces, for many years when I joined, they talked about human rights. They had something called SHARP training, which is a type of training to prevent harassment for human rights, to make sure that we welcomed women, minorities, Indigenous peoples into the Canadian Forces with open and welcoming arms. And so this had been already going on for many years, this type of training, up to about 15 years at this point. But I met this gentleman and he came up to me and he said, you know what, I know what you're doing with your hair and I don't like that. I think this is a terrible thing for the forces, and I think it's a disgrace to the uniform. That was the padre of my unit. But he was also the harassment advisor. If I had a complaint to make about harassment, I was to go see him to make the complaint. Isn't that ironic? The great irony sometimes in these large institutions. But it didn't stop. You must never stop. You must keep going. And so I grew my hair long, like it is today. And so I'm actually still in the Canadian Armed Forces. Actually, I'm with the Royal Winnipeg Rifles, where I am a warrant officer. Been doing it proudly for 27 years. And today we actually have a drum group. They're called the Warriors. They're made up of men and women. It's the very first in the Canadian Forces of young men and women. And every week we get together. Even during COVID, we would get inside a teepee outside, and we would, around a sacred fire, and we would sing songs. And we continue to maintain this tradition. And we continue to try and redefine what a warrior means and what teachings it has, to try and make sure that the warriors here who defend Canada have an understanding of traditional Indigenous codes around what it means to be a warrior, about love, care, protection, about caring for the ones around us, about loving the ones around us. Not only just yourself and thinking about yourself, but also about society, about our families, and why we work and why what we do what we do. So, and I know there's a lot of, maybe there's a few veterans out there, I don't know, but I thought I would sing a little bit of a song just to honor some of those veterans who some aren't here, but I think about Melvin Swan or Winston Watney. I think about Wambadi, who are in the Manitoba Indigenous Veterans Association. Often you'll see them at powwows. Maybe you saw Joe McConts a few times. He used to have a large headdress. He was a great member of the community, always going to every powwow. These veterans are extremely important because they are a connection to our past about what it meant to be a warrior. And it doesn't mean you have to join the forces to be a warrior, but you could. But it's also about being brave in life, and sometimes even when you're not welcome in a certain place, to continue to be in that place, to occupy that space, because space is extremely important. Elders talk about time and place. Leroy Littlebear, an elder from the Blackfeet people, the pagan people, he talks about that and about occupying time and space, and how if we don't occupy time and space, someone else will. So I will sing a song. If anyone wants to stand up, you can. Or if you're happy sitting, you're welcome to as well. Now the battle begins again, the microphone. Hey, tapwe. Ooh, truth. So thank you very much. I appreciate you listening to my own personal story. Obviously, there's a little bit more that goes on in the Canadian Forces than that, and it is a changing place, I have to admit. We did actually have to ask permission to form the drum group from the chain of command, and they were very supportive. They've been helping to supply us with money and time and budget to do these things. And so little bit, by occupying this space, you can make the change that you desire and need. Hey.
Thank you.
Oh, I get a gift. Oh, they're giving me a gift. Shall I open it up here? Shall we see what it is?
Go for it. Yeah, go for it.
Now this young lady up here, she was harassing me to confirm timings. She is this amazing organizer. So if there's anyone out there who needs a good organizer, I think this young lady is very, very good at what she does. She's pretty amazing. Kira, yeah. Oh, chocolate. Oh, whatever. Maybe I'll go around and I'll give out some chocolate to everyone here. But Ikse, thank you very much for the kind gift, and thank you very much to the Church of Dignity people who do such wonderful work for, I think now 7 years, isn't it? 8th year. Okay, 7 was last year, 8. The big 8. And I remember the very first year that they did that, they had us running around, and I've run in the rain a couple times, pouring down. Very cold one time, freezing and shivering out there in my little shorts and my knees knobbling about. Anyways, congratulations for such continuing the hard work and to everyone. Those were good memories.
Right on.